Good afternoon. My name is Maureen Lemastny, and I want to welcome you to this meeting of the Police Reform Work Group. I welcome not only our members, but also the public who are watching these proceedings. If you're joining us for the first time, our mission is to provide our County Executive, Angela Alsobrooks, with substantive recommendations that will establish fair practices across the board, maximize transparency, and restore public trust in law enforcement. The work group was not created to decide the merits of any pending or potential litigation, nor will the work group make any factual determinations in regard to any lawsuits or controversies. The work group was created to make recommendations regarding the policies of the Prince George's County Police Department and not to resolve, discuss, or comment upon any specific or alleged events. Tonight is the formal voting session for recommendations for 3 of our subcommittees. First will be Independent Oversight, Compliance, and Integrity that was chaired by Delegate Fisher. Second will be Internal Policies and County Regulations, which was chaired by Glenn Ivey, Mr. Ivey. And the third will be Financial Management, which was chaired by Ms. Danso. Delegate Washington.
Thank you, Judge Lemastny, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Alonzo Washington, State Delegate for District 22 here in Prince George's County and co-chair of the Police Reform Work Group. We have been meeting weekly for the past several months to develop innovative structural reforms to our county's police department. We have held presentations and discussions on training, hiring practices, employee retention, citizens' complaints, the police department's budget, mental health, police use of force policies, and many more. We have held multiple public listening sessions and reviewed dozens of submissions from county residents across the county on police reform. While the work group is now beginning to wrap up, we still have a lot of work to do. Today, we will take final votes on subcommittee recommendations to be sent to the county executive. We will be considering proposals on the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, LEOBR, the Prince George's County Police Budget, the Inspector General's Office, and several other crucial subject areas. I look forward to another excellent meeting tonight and I look forward to the opportunity to recommend robust, comprehensive proposals to improve public safety here in Prince George's County. Right now, we will begin with recommendations from the Independent Oversight, Compliance, and Integrity Subcommittee, which was chaired by my friend Delegate Juanita Fisher. So first, for everyone, for your consideration, we have the first recommendation we have here is establish the Office of Integrity and Compliance, in which the Inspector General will serve as the director. Any questions or I see Ms. Pruitt. Ms. Pruitt, questions?
Good afternoon, everybody. I just wanted to get some clarity. So I read all of the supporting evidence and comments. Is the Inspector General's office now just one person, or is there already staff? And the second part of that question is the suggestion to move all of that staff, including the Inspector General, over to the new position and office?
Delegate Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Sonia, how are you?
Hi,
yes, it is. Right now, the Inspector General is just one person, which is not enough for a department of our size. Due to the nature of, if you look at the qualifying evidence that our subcommittee put together through our work, in order to really have a dynamic of compliance and oversight, it's our recommendation to move the Inspector General out from the department, but to have a direct line from the county executive to the Inspector General. So that is why, and we recommend staff because that is a lot to do with what the subcommittee worked on to have the Inspector General accomplish. It would be a tall glass of water without any help. So that is where the staffing recommendation also came from.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any objections to this recommendation?
I have a question, please. I'm sorry, I need to raise my hand, but
yes, Ms. Danso.
yes, thank you. Delegate Fisher, I also have a question. With respect to subpart A4, I wanted to know whether or not you'd be opposed to a modification to include the state's attorney's office in terms of receiving that report, particularly as it relates to, as you've identified here, trends and patterns and things like that with respect to data in the IA Pro system. And the reason why I would make that suggestion or I guess recommended modification is because I think it would be important for the state's attorney's office to also know what to look for in their respective cases and to be able to make decisions accordingly. So that would be a modification that I would be asking for.
So
Thank you for.
let me just say that we are not making modifications on this at this moment. We have to accept the recommendation as is. If there's modifications to the language that makes it more clear, we can do that. But if there's any substantive changes, then we won't be considering those today, just to be clear. But Delegate Fisher, did you want to clear that up? Just because from my understanding is that the Inspector General's reports are all going to be public, so everyone has.
Yes, that's what I was going to say. And Judy, I really appreciate your point. And I also believe there's a lot of recommendations. So somewhere in there, I know there is, I want to say, anyway, one of the recommendations does have a report, like something reporting to the state's attorney. And we also included CCOP. But it's the way the language and the cleanup of the language would be public. So the state's attorney would have access to those trends and that information as well.
Okay, thank you, Delegate.
Yeah, no problem. And we can update that so it's made clear that those recommendations are made public to everyone.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Any objections to this first recommendation? Anyone request a vote on this recommendation? Seeing none, that recommendation has been accepted with unanimous consent. We move on to recommendation number 2, which is establish a more robust and equitable citizens complaint oversight panel. Any questions on this recommendation?
Yes, I do. Oh,
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I saw you unmute, but I didn't hear you say it.
I'm looking for the hand and don't see it, so
Okay.
I apologize. I wanted to see if I could get some clarification as it relates to 2D and 2D, please. And that is create an appeals process for the panel to the chief's decisions. I'm not sure I understand.
Yes, I can clarify that. And also if any of my committee mates wanted to jump in as well. So we got a recommendation, and I apologize about my memory. The recommendation came from outside of our subcommittee about what happens when the CCOP has a line of recommendation and that's not taken up by the chief. And there was a concept about the fact that, officers can appeal and those decisions. Why can't there be the dynamic of the CCOP doing that? So that was taken into consideration, and what was developed in the recommendation was the ability to say that, we don't agree with the chief's decision. This is this is the CCOP finding, and to basically to appeal to say that the chief could reconsider or do something in the alternative because there is a disagreement between what the CCOP recommended and what the chief decided to go forward with.
So the appeal is to whom? That's what I'm missing. Are you saying that the CCOP appeals to the chief for him to revisit his decision, or that there's an appeal? Who is the appeal?
The appeal isn't to, I was like, Keith, can you help me remember? The appeal isn't to the chief. I don't think that's what we said.
Hi, when we discussed it, good morning, Char. Good afternoon. When we discussed it, we had discussed basically the appeal. It's those rare occasions when the CCOP disagrees with the chief because he has the ultimate decision making. And if it's of such weight that they think they have to take action, they would appeal to the circuit court to address and make the decision. So we wouldn't necessarily, they wouldn't have a veto over the chief, but they'd bring in a neutral arbitrator, which would be the circuit court, or some function, some capability to get it to a neutral arbitrator.
Okay. And then the last part of D says allow the panel to have independent investigation authority.
That, where,
How would that happen? And
we didn't have, I'm just trying to look at the right bullet point. I don't believe we authorized that particular recommendation. I don't know if you're looking at the same.
am I looking at something? Does somebody else have something different?
That's what it said. That's what it has on here, Delegate Fisher. Allow the panel to have independent investigation authority in case of a serious bodily injury and or death caused by an officer.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's, I'm not sure.
Let me ask Mr. Lockridge. Mr. Lockridge, did you?
Yeah, he's looking at me. I thought something totally different, so.
This came up in the subcommittee and we went back and forth. Originally, we'd had a request, I think, from the committee to actually provide them with investigators and fund a full investigative team. We didn't think that was appropriate, but we thought where there were, again, extraordinary circumstances, they have the capability to basically request an investigator from some resource.
Oh, yeah,
and
and we said that it could be
Right.
contracted third party. It could
Delegate
be,
Fisher, hold on
it
one
could be
second.
contracted out. I'm sorry, I had a brain freeze. Apologize.
Take it away. If you've got it, you could take it away.
No, you go ahead, Keith. I'm sorry. It's coming back to me now.
So basically, it gives them, and under, again, those extraordinary circumstances where they think they have to take action, which are beyond the norm, would give them the capability, but it doesn't necessarily build in every circumstance for them to do an investigation. So in those cases where there's a death or some police action, which I think requires extraordinary circumstance, and they need to take those options, we give them the option. But again, we don't really provide resources for it, so it'd have to be extraordinary and they'd have to seek the resources for it.
Got it.
And the other, can I add something to that?
Sure, go
Delegate
ahead.
Washington, again, I'm so sorry about my brain being somewhere else. And something that was part of the discussion was because we didn't really recommend a funding mechanism for a third party investigator, right? It would be something that the county executive in these recommendations and us, they would really have to consider and allocate and further that discussion in order to do it. And I think something that that I think the committee found throughout our work is the reality of anything that comes with anything that we want to have oversight and compliance with our law enforcement, we are depending on that same agency for that investigation and that investigative help and that information. That's like the streamlined theme. And so at least, and there might be other things that come up outside of this work group on the state level and other things that there might be different types of independent investigators that might occur outside of the authority of Prince George's County. But at least this way, we can sort of meet halfway by giving that ability in this recommendation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, Ms. Jackson, you got one more question?
No, I have no more questions, but respectfully, I would object to D. And just because I have no problem with the rest, but I would object to D. It just seems like from a process perspective, there would be issues, especially as it relates to any appeal to the circuit court. It would take a significant amount of time. First of all, I don't even know if that's possible, but it would take a significant amount of time to complete the process. And then with regard to the independent investigative authority for the panel, I'm just not sure how that would work. So.
Okay, I got that. Yep. Okay, so what I would like to do then, I see Mr. Preston's hand up right now. So what I would like to do then is, can we accept 2A, B, and C as recommendations by the work group to be considered? Any objections to recommendations 2A, B, and C? Seeing no objections and no vote calls, We're going to accept those with unanimous consent. We're now on D. Mr. Preston, do you want to talk about 2D? You have a question on 2D?
Yes, Delegate Washington, thank you. And to Delegate Fisher, as it relates to point D and the investigation by the CCOP, are we talking about criminal matters in where a serious injury or death occurs, or are we talking about administrative matters, the administrative investigation?
Well, at that point, it would be administrative because they would have already had their criminal with the state's attorney or whoever would have authority over that investigation.
Okay, and that's just where I wanted to clarify that we were definitely talking about the administrative and not the
Yeah,
criminal.
if you,
That's
yeah.
already done by the
Thank
state.
you. I think I should have maybe said that to the body, because if you're for those who are unfamiliar, if you're an officer, you have your administrative lane and then you have your criminal charges lane. That's going to be well, currently now fully sits with the state's attorney's office in that process.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let me just, Mr. Turner, Ms. Harvin, can you just resend the voting list to everyone, please? So everyone has a copy of the voting list.
Okay, stand by. I'll do that now.
Thank you very much. And so we're going to take one last question from Mr. Turner on this, on 2D.
Yes, thank you, Delegate Washington. Just for clarity, so I understand that this question has to do with administrative decisions made by the chief, but at what stage are we talking about? Are we talking about, after, we talking about officers who have been charged administratively and then they go through a trial board and the trial board makes a decision? Or are we talking about, early on in the process and, where, for instance, the chief may decide that the matter should not be presented to, or an officer should not be charged administratively. Does that make any sense?
I think I understand, and I think for the committee we left it a little bit broad with the intentionality that it would be them making that call about when they wanted to do that and execute that authority to appeal that decision. So I'll look to my committee if I'm miscommunicating our thought process, but that to me was where we left the conversation. I also think there was an intention that it would be obviously in matters of serious bodily injury and or death, which most tend to go through the full hearing process for matters like that. But we didn't want to confine anything, but I'll let anyone in the committee comment.
Mr. Delegate Fisher, let me go to Mr. Barnes. And
sure.
It should be early in the process before any decision is made, not after it goes to a hearing board. Initially, the CCOP was to get cases early on in the process before any final decision was made. So once the case gets reviewed by the CCOP and the chief's decision, I think the intent was if there was a disagreement between the chief and the CCOP, that there would be someone in between that they could appeal to before the case advanced to the next stage. So, and that's where you get to sustain charge or decide if there's going to be a hearing. So that would have been early in the process. And my recollection of the appeal is it was not, I thought it was going to be done by someone either, above the chief, which would be in the county government system, someone either the county executive or someone in the office they could appeal to before the case got advanced.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so it seems like we have number 2D, recommendation 2D, which reads, create an appeals process for the panel to the chief's decisions and allow the panel to have independent investigation authority in case of a serious bodily injury and or death caused by an officer. Where the motion is to accept this amendment, to accept this recommendation from the subcommittee. So we're going to go with that motion. Any questions? And shall we take anyone wants a roll call on this? Anyone wants us to take a roll call on this?
Could I ask a quick question?
Very quick, Mr. Ivey. We skipped that part, but go ahead, real quick.
Is this an appeal? I'm just based on the last point. Who is this appeal to? Is it to the circuit court or to somebody?
So originally it was to the circuit court, but it's like, these are recommendations. So it says an appeal and for them to figure out the process. So if the process ends up being the circuit court or the process ends up being someone higher in county government that you heard Mr. Barnes, state, that would be there. It's a recommendation to make a process for an appeal to exist, and we would leave it to the county to figure out what's the appropriate process.
Yeah, and Delegate Fisher, the idea here is for them to have an appeal process available to them, correct?
Yes.
That's the goal that this recommendation is trying to make, and the county and the county executive's office can figure out what that appeal process could look like to be able to elevate the CCOP's opinion on some of these matters, correct?
Yes.
Got it.
Much more eloquent than me.
No, I'm just summarizing your everything that you said. That's it. All right, so we're gonna call a vote on this, Miss Lieutenant Harvin. We're gonna call a vote on 2D. Just to make sure that folks feel comfortable in voting for this this measure. So, Lieutenant Harvey, can we call the roll on this?
So the motion is made to accept amendment to 2D.
Correct.
Okay. Judge Lamazny.
To accept an amendment or to accept 2D?
To accept 2D.
Okay. Yes, I vote yes.
Delegate Washington.
Yes.
Is Dr. Askew, I think he's not on. Mr. Barnes.
Yes.
Ms. Danso.
Yes.
Ms. Felix-Lawson.
Yes.
Delegate Fisher.
Yes.
Harris. You're muted, Ms. Gutierrez. We'll come back to Ms. Gutierrez. She's muted. Mr. Ivy.
Yes.
DCAO Jackson.
No.
Mr. Lockridge.
Yes.
Mr. Ruddy.
No.
Dr. Marsh.
Yes.
Ms. Morning.
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill.
Yes.
Ms. Oradaya.
Yes.
Mr. Preston.
Yes.
Ms. Pruitt.
Yes.
Councilman Streeter.
Yes.
Mr. Turner.
No.
Judge Williams.
Yeah, it's a little vague for me, so I say no.
Yes, sir. No. And we're back
That's
to
a
Ms.
no.
Gutierrez. Yes, sir. And we're back to Ms. Gutierrez.
I am sorry. I was having computer troubles, and I also a no.
A no.
Yes.
Okay. We have 15 yeses. And we have 5 no's.
Thank you, Lieutenant Harvin. And so that means that recommendation will be accepted by the committee. The last two bullet points on recommendation number 2, I just want to read those off so that everyone knows which ones we're referring to. Letter E is increase the number of staff and legal counsels to be able to handle the number of cases. And F recommendation is CCOP should receive automatic advisement notifications by PGPD Internal Affairs of police-involved deaths and high-profile use of force cases at the same time as the Prince George's County State's Attorney's Office. Are there any objections to those last 2 sub-bullet point recommendations of recommendation number 2? Will anyone want to vote on this? Seeing none, those recommendations are accepted with unanimous consent. The next recommendation everyone has in front of them is recommendation number 3. It states, eliminate the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, LEOBR. Do I hear any objections to this recommendation? Do I hear?
This is,
Can we, go ahead, Donnell.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. This is how we're gonna do this. Okay. If you have a question, you can either raise your hand or you can place it in the chat. Just let me know so I can go to each and every person that has a question. Okay. And in the order that you raise your hand. So we're gonna take a few questions on this one. So Mr. Turner first, then Ms. Jackson, Mr. Preston, and then Ms. Pruitt.
thank you, Delegate Washington. So I do object to this this recommendation. This one is number 3 is followed by a modification of LEOBR. So I am in favor of number 4, but I'm opposed to number 3. So that's pretty much it.
Okay, Ms. Jackson.
I still can't find the hand on my screen, so I'm sorry, but I would have had the same comment as Mr. Turner, so.
Okay, got it. Mr. Preston.
I guess we're being repetitive. I agree with Mr. Turner. I disagree with the first one, but would be in favor of a modification.
Got it. Thank you very much. Ms. Pruitt.
My question is, what the thinking was that we have number 3 and number 4. They seem like they kind of conflict.
Sure, Delegate
Sure.
Fisher.
Yeah. So our committee was hard work, y'all. But anyway, I know they can sound conflicting, but I think both number 3 and number 4 are recommendations to the county executive for things that she cannot directly control. So the LEOBR is state law. It is in Annapolis. Myself and Delegate Washington will be working on that in the upcoming months, but we do not know what outcome will come from the session. So it's the committee's disposition that our appeal of the LEOBR would be most favorable, but depending on politics and how the sausage is made, we didn't also want to not provide recommendations on how the LEOBR could be modified to best produce oversight and transparency for our local department. So if we had a magic wand and can control other entities that influence our department, we would do that. But we also wanted to make sure this group recommended almost 2 sets so that there was some guidance and position taking on behalf of the county on what kind of state laws would enable us to have true transparency and oversight. So even though they can kind of seem counterintuitive because we're like, get rid of the LEOBR, but if you don't do that, here's some ways to modify it. And even on recommendation number 4, we really picked our top priorities. There, we could have an hour-long call of the ways LEOBR is very limiting to providing a true process of transparency. And we didn't want to inundate this committee with every single suggestion and issue. It took us about two meetings to go through LEOBR in its entirety and everything that it limited in what we wanted to recommend. For example, if you have a complaint in the county, giving citizens an actual timeline. When you hand something in, it will be done by this date. We can't do that the way the LEOBR is structured. So that's really the rationale, and I would leave it to, I have very, very intelligent committee members, I have to say, who have taught me a lot. And if any of them would like to add to that rationale, that would be great.
Well, hold on one second. Let's see if Ms. Pruitt has a follow-up question.
Oh, I do not. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Ms. Fisher, I think with Delegate Fisher, what you're saying is that with the elimination of LEOBR, what we're saying is that right now the status quo is not working with LEOBR. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Thank you. The next question we have is Ms. Danso.
Yes, I think my questions have been answered. I too had, some thoughts about, okay, it's a recommendation to eliminate, and then what? Is there a replacement of some sort that's being recommended? But I believe that goes into the modifications for recommendation number 4. So I'm good. Thank you.
Correct. Delegate Fisher, you thought of it all. So with that being said, is there, so there was an objection to, there's a few objections to number 3.
I notated raising my hand.
Oh, I didn't see anything.
No, it's okay. I put it in the chat.
I apologize. Go ahead, Ms. Oriana.
No, I just wanted to vocalize, one, thanking the committee for the hard work and elevating this recommendation of repealing the Officer Bill of Rights has been one that we've heard countless times by many advocates, community organizations. We haven't had any advocates or community organizations not want to repeal the Officer Bill of Rights. So I am in firm support of this recommendation, and thank you for your foresight of understanding that the key recommendation is obviously advocating against it, but being prepared, if that's not, to have the subset of recommendations for if there is modifications needed. So just wanted to say thank you, and then note that this is a recommendation that we've heard countless times by so many organizations, advocates, and a recommendation I put forth to that committee as well.
There, Mr. Ivy, last question.
Yeah, just real quick. I think I take the point about 3 and 4, but you know, there were things, if we didn't vote for 3, there would be things I would add to 4. Like say the 5-day, you know, an officer doesn't have to give a statement for 5 days. So I think there's a lot of big ones. So I might be the inverse. I might be voting for 3 and not 4, because I don't want to send a message to the county exec that if she gets these 4 done, I'm okay. There's a lot of other stuff I think that should go. So for me, number 3 is the key one. And she can sort it out after that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm saying Delegate Ivy, I'm used to Delegate. I appreciate that, Glenn. You know, something that we talked a lot about, and you know, if any of you have time, find time to have coffee with Orlando. I'm just going to say that. He's a wealth of knowledge. You know, it's also about how we enforce things, right? The law says 5 days, but if no one follows up with that officer, it could be 10 days. You know what I mean? There's nothing that triggers it. So we totally understand that. We had a litany of things, but I understand that sentiment too, Mr. Ivy, I do.
All right, let me just say this, that on your voting list, those aren't the full recommendations. Again, the full recommendation is on your Excel sheet that we sent around, the spreadsheet that we sent around as well. So with that said, let's call the roll, since it was moved by the subcommittee to accept recommendation number 3. So Lieutenant Harvin, let's call the roll on recommendation number 3. To accept it. This is to accept the recommendation.
Okay. For the motion to accept number 3A, Judge Lamasley, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Delegate Washington?
I vote yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Ms. Danso?
Yes.
Ms. Felix-Lawson?
Yes.
Delegate Fisher?
Yes.
Ms. Gutierrez?
I vote yes.
Mr. Ivy?
Yes.
DCL Jackson?
Sorry. No, as written, no.
Mr. Lockridge?
Yes.
Mr. Ruddy?
No.
Dr. Marsh?
Yes.
Ms. Morning?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
No.
Ms. Oradaya?
Yes.
Mr. Preston?
No.
Ms. Pruitt?
Yes.
Councilman Streeter?
No.
Mr. Turner? Mr. Turner? We'll come back to Mr. Turner. Judge Williams?
No.
Okay. And finally, Mr. Turner.
Okay, I'm sorry. My computer keeps freezing. Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm sorry. No.
Okay, I'm gonna have to start treating y'all like we do in Annapolis. If it's more than 2 passes, it's over. You don't get the vote. But let's make sure we all are aware of how we're voting. Miss Lieutenant Harvin, what's the vote count?
You have 13 yes and 7 no.
Okay, so that recommendation has been, number 3 has been accepted to eliminate the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, LEOBR. We're gonna move on to recommendation number 4, which is modify certain sections of the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. Any objections to this or any questions? Any questions or any objections to this recommendation? Seeing no objections or no questions, anyone wants to call for a vote on this recommendation? Seeing
Delegate
none-
Washington,
Yes, Ms. Gutierrez.
quick question. So since we voted to eliminate the LABOBR, how does this function within it?
Hi, Ms. Gutierrez, this just function as these recommendations are going to our county executive, and she has the ability to advocate and be a part of policymaking in Annapolis, but she does not have a vote in Annapolis. So we wanted to give her recommendations of tools if there is a political situation where repeal isn't happening, it's not passing in Annapolis, that she can have insight on different modifications that we'd be looking for to the statute. So that's really why we had both sets. And I definitely echo and understand Mr. Ivy's point about having the intentionality of what the legislative directive should be for the county in this upcoming session as well. But we felt the LEOBR was so contentious and very long for us as a group when we had presentations, and very long on the subcommittee, that we wanted to offer some recommendations. But making legislation is a very, I've learned, very active and moving process. Things can change, especially with this coming in a week. So to have something for her to have if things don't go towards the repeal recommendation.
Thank you. Ms. Gutierrez, you have a follow-up? Ms. Gutierrez?
Nope, that was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Oriata.
Just clarification on how it will be framed in the final recommendation. Would it be framed as, we recommend that you advocate to repeal it, and then only if it's not to advocate for these changes? Or will both recommendations just be put forth individually? We recommend repealing it, we recommend advocating for these changes.
Well, this is my first time in working on a draft proposal to the county executive. I assume that I will be able to look at the recommendations from my subcommittee, and that's our intention in writing it. That's the intention and how we want it written, is that the committee has supported an appeal, or a repeal, I'm sorry. If a repeal is not feasible, it's clear that this statute needs changes. Here's some recommendations on some changes that would be well thought of. So,
And I would just add that these are recommendations from us, and these are the feelings that we have, that some of these could be changed in a General Assembly, that we as a task force supports in the legislature. We support the repeal of LEOBR. If that does not occur, we support these modifications as a task force as well. So with that said, I didn't hear any objections. I did hear questions. Can we accept this? We are going to accept this with unanimous consent and without any objections. We'll move on. That has been accepted, and we'll move on to the fifth of 13 recommendations, everybody. And we're an hour in, just FYI. But let's go to the next recommendation. Recommendation number 5. Change the administrative hearing board process in the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. Modify the sections of LEOBR to change the administrative hearing board. Any questions on this recommendation? Any objections to the recommendation? Tara, are you coming? Okay. Okay, good. Okay, seeing none, it seems like we have accepted, without any objections, we have accepted recommendation number 5 to be considered as our recommendations. Number 6 recommendation is to codify the new discipline matrix under review by the Prince George's County Police Chief. Any questions or any objections to this recommendation? Seeing no objections to this recommendation has been accepted as a recommendation of this work group. Recommendation number 7, improve the public complaint process to ensure more access, oversight, and accountability in the Prince George's County Police Department. Any objections to this? Any objections or questions to this recommendation? Seeing no questions or objections to this recommendation, we will accept this recommendation to the full body as written. Recommendation number 8, improve professional interactions between Prince George's County Police Department employees and the community. Any objections to this recommendation? Seeing none, recommendation number 8 has been accepted as a recommendation. Recommendation number 9, improve the staff capacity of the Discovery Compliance Unit in the Prince George's County Police Department. Any objections to this recommendation?
It's not an objection, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Delegate. I just wanted to provide clarifying language in subpart A. That supplies copies of body worn and dash camera footage to the defense attorneys. That should be to the state's attorney's office. The department provides this information or evidence to the state's attorney's office, and we in turn provide it to the defense. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, Delegate Fisher or Ms.
Yeah,
go ahead.
That's correct, Judy. I think it just got written incorrectly. So
No worries. I know it's not a modification. I think it just, we were joking in the subcommittee because Keith was like, you can provide it directly to me. And I was like, Keith, we got to have limits somewhere.
All right, let's keep the
Oh, I'm sorry, my bad.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah, let's keep it the subcommittee meetings in the subcommittee meetings.
I'm sorry. I apologize.
All right. Okay. Seeing no other questions, were there I thought someone else raised a hand too. Ms. Pruitt, no. Okay, got it. Okay, so then are we then I don't see any other objections to number 9 except the clerical error that we have here. And so with no objections, we will accept this recommendation. We'll move on to recommendation number 10, which is research and adopt new internal data collection software system for the Prince George's County Police Department. Are there any objections to this one? Seeing none, thank you very much. We will accept that recommendation as written with no objections. Number 11, the 11th recommendation is to develop a user-friendly data dashboard for transparency in the police department. This says create an interactive website that allows the public to easily view and understand statistics about the department, preferably on the Prince George's County Police Department website. Any objections to this recommendation? Seeing no objections to this recommendation, we have accept this recommendation with unanimous consent. We will move on to number 12. Recommendation number 12 says hire a race and gender equity director for the Prince George's County Police Department that will serve under the Office of Integrity and Compliance. Any objections or questions to this recommendation? Seeing no objections to this recommendation, number 12, to hire a race and gender equity director, we will accept that recommendation without objections. Number 13, the 13th recommendation is improve recruitment process for police officers. Are there any objections to this recommendation? Seeing no objections to this recommendation, recommendation number 13 has been accepted as written. Number 14, the 14th recommendation states modifications to the Maryland Public Information Act for body-worn camera footage. Are there any objections to this recommendation or questions? Seeing no objections or questions to this recommendation, we will accept recommendation number 14 as written. I want to just thank everybody for your time. That's the final recommendation for the Independent Oversight, Compliance, and Integrity Subcommittee that was chaired by Delegate Juanita Fisher. Judge Lamassney? You're muted, Judge.
Sorry. Sorry. All right, we're going to do internal policies and county regulations, Mr. Ivy's subcommittee. The first recommendation is in order to decrease racial profiling, the Prince George's County Police Department shall adopt general orders that limit pretextual stops. The county executive shall direct the chief of police to issue a general order that motor vehicles with regulatory infractions that are otherwise operating lawfully will not be stopped. PGPD shall consider other methods, mail, email, etc., to notify the owner of the vehicle of the infraction and any other details related to the infraction. Any objection to this recommendation?
I have a question, an objection, I guess, a question. More so.
Sure.
When we say regulatory infractions, are we, I'm assuming we're including infractions that are criminal in nature?
We're talking, well, I'll let Mr. Ivy answer. We're talking about infraction tint, a taillight out, infractions that don't involve the safe operation of the motor vehicle. Mr. Ivy?
Yeah, the answer is no. We're not these are not intended to infringe on criminal, the traffic enforcement for criminal operation of motor vehicle. Drunk driving, reckless driving, speeding 80 miles an hour, that sort of thing. This is aimed at the type of stops that, in my view, regularly lead to that are pretextual stops. Air fresheners hanging from the rearview mirror, tent is another one. But the things that when you see it pop up on your desk, you're like, okay, I know what's going on here. And usually they're followed up with consent searches and that sort of thing.
All right, thank you.
All right, any other questions?
Yes.
All right, any objection?
This is Dwayne Preston. I just have one question.
Sure.
Ivy. And I fully agree with the intent of this in terms of eliminating pretextual stops. But some issues of enforcement are for safety issues. For instance, if you have a vehicle that has no lights because it's inoperable, it's a safety issue. And the applicable enforcement of that, without other motives, I think is appropriate. And so for that, I just wanted to ask any consideration given to those, because this takes away that discretion if we go with or recommend this recommendation.
Mr. Ivy, do you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's if the car's driving at night with like absolutely no lights on, is that what you're meaning?
Like, for instance, we've had vehicles that have electrical issues that have no power to the rear taillights, which makes the vehicle where you can't see it at night, obviously. So that's a safety issue, which could contribute to accidents and things of that sort. So I believe that would be something that would be appropriate for an officer to enforce. And like I said, I fully agree and understand what the intent is in trying to eliminate the pretextual stops. But, absent that, I believe that this would be appropriate to allow enforcement of that matter.
I think that's a fair point. And I would go back to the line that the judge was drawing, which is you know, if it's a public safety issue, and I think those would be in that category. Certainly no rear tail lights, for example, or no headlights, I think would be at night would be a public safety issue, but that's not really what we're aimed at getting at.
Right, if it was unsafe to continue to let the motor vehicle proceed on the road, and you can articulate that, that's exactly what the police should be doing, is stopping that vehicle.
And just to follow up on that, my final statement will be is it possible, I know Delegate Washington said there were no modifications to the recommendations as written, but being that statement was just made, I don't understand how do we ensure that is communicated as a recommendation?
Well, I think I think the language where we're talking about regulatory infractions and with a vehicle that is otherwise operating lawfully.
I'll just throw this in there too. You know, this will be in a general order, so I think it could be written in. But I do kind of wonder in the scenario you're talking about, whereas, you know, a lot of times I know when they stop a car like in that, are they taking them home and towing the car, or are they giving them a ticket and telling them and sending them on their way? If they're giving them a ticket and sending them on their way, then I don't know that it gets to the point you're trying to make from the public safety standpoint. And I'm pretty sure they're not stopping people with the taillight out and giving them a ride home and towing the car. That's really not what's going on.
And I'm not suggesting I think that would be an excessive to do, is to tow someone's vehicle in that situation.
Right.
Will exacerbate the problem. So no, that's not what I'm suggesting at all.
Yeah,
Okay.
but if I'm not, as written, it says otherwise operating lawfully. I think for everything that you could issue an equipment repair order for, there's a corresponding traffic article that a citation could be issued also. So it would be considered unlawful.
True. You're absolutely right, Orlando.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point here is not to ask for a revision or a rewrite of the state traffic code, although, you know, I'd be open to that for some of these. I don't think air fresheners on the rear view mirror are really a problem we need a state law for, but, you know, we could have a separate conversation about that. But this isn't what we're getting at. I mean, this is really about officers using a lot of discretion. Look, if they were stopping every car, you know, with not young black, I'll just be explicit, not young black males driving the car and issuing citations. And then, by the way, hey, do you mind if I take a look in your car? And you know, you don't have anything in there. So there's no reason to object. Let me look in your car and see what's going on. Why don't you step out of the car? That's what we're after. So, and I think we can write the general orders in a way that reflect a strong decision and leadership from the chief on down that we need to stop doing that. We really do. I'm tired of being stopped. I'm tired of my sons being stopped. I'm tired of their friends being stopped. We need to do something to change this. If you guys have another idea about how to go about doing it, I'm all ears, but it's time to draw the line.
Delegate Fisher, did you have your hand raised?
Yes, I just wanted to add a legislative point to Mr. Ivy's points. So a few years ago, obviously, you all know the hanging rear view became a secondary, and a bill I did last year that is now law. If you are obstructing your license plate with like "Go Ravens" around it, that is now a secondary. And when Maryland State Police, and that passed, and it's now law October 1st. And when Maryland State Police pulled all the numbers across every single county in the state of Maryland, brown and black people are pulled over for that traffic infraction at an exacerbated rate, to the fact that Maryland State Police didn't even testify against. They just silently allowed, you know, my bill to go through. So I just think even that will show you that this recommendation is already happening in a policy way, and I think is the right direction to go in.
All right, let's hear briefly from Ms. Oriata, Ms. Gutierrez, and Ms. Jackson, and then we'll see if we need to vote.
Thank you. Again, thanking you and your committee for this recommendation. It's one, again, that has been elevated by so many organizations, advocates, a recommendation that I put forth as well to the committee and PG Changemakers. I think to the exact thing you said. It gets to the heart of the issue that we have Black and brown people that are systematically stopped in not just this county, but in this country. That is a clear reality, and this is a tangible way in which we can stop it. And the intent of this recommendation is so clear. And I love the point that you elevated, that if someone had no lights on, they would not pull them over and tow their car and give them a ride home. So the realities of even if they pull that car over to stop, what that actually could lead to, and the conversations that we've had about how a simple stop could lead and escalate to something greater, and the losses that we have seen in this county about simple stops leading to someone losing their life. I think this is a tangible recommendation that gets to the heart of the issue of why this work group was founded and started. So I just thank you and appreciate the recommendation.
Thank you. Ms. Gutierrez?
So from a practical standpoint, I think, like Delegate Fisher has said, the proper form of taking care of this issue is really making it a secondary offense from a transportation article level. I don't know that this new policy would actually solve the issues. If anything, it could create more opportunity for an officer to have to make that judgment call and end up towing a lot of people's cars, because what we're really saying to them is, if the car is not drivable and that's what you're going to need in order to explain that stop, then you're going to end up with your vehicle towed. So I personally think that this policy may be creating more issues than it is solving, and it's probably better solved in Annapolis by Delegate Fisher and Delegate Washington.
All right, Ms. Jackson?
Yeah, I just want to say, I do want to commend Mr. Ivy and the group. I think that many of us, including myself, have concerns around pretextual stops. But I'll just say, from a government perspective, from somebody who's in the government, is going to have to implement a lot of our recommendations. The clarifications that we're giving are helpful, but they're not written in the recommendations. And it's going to be a challenge for us. And so that's why you see, I think many, from a government perspective, we're really kind of trying to figure out, trying to get the writing clear, the message clear. And because we're not able to modify, it is a little bit of a challenge. So I just wanted to raise that point.
Judge Lemessy, can I hop in real quick?
Of course.
There's to respond to Ms. Jackson, there's ability for us to clarify the intent of the recommendation and to provide any additional directions. What we're saying right now is that we aren't going to take any supplemental requests right now, right here, right now. But if we need to explain it a little bit more and how it can be implemented, I think that we can definitely talk about that before the report is provided to the county executive on December 4th. So that can be done so that folks like you can actually implement this in a way of the intent of the task force. So we can work on that too.
Or also, of course, Ms. Alsobrooks can decide to implement this and change the language, or change, if she accepts that the idea is a valid idea. Does anyone want to vote? All right, a vote has been called for, so let's vote on whether or not to approve recommendation.
Judge, I'm sorry. I was raising my hand because I wanted to clarify my comment. I wasn't calling for a vote.
Oh, okay. You weren't calling for a vote.
No, I wanted to clarify my point about it being legislative. Legislation takes a lot of work, and it took a lot for me to make the infraction a secondary. And we're talking about an enforcement arm. There's tons of books, there's tons of laws on the books that aren't enforced all the time, every day, to a lot of people. And so I just didn't want my point, because it was reshaped a little bit, to be taken. I was saying that there already is a trend that people are thinking the way Mr. Ivy and the subcommittee are thinking. I don't think that Annapolis is the solution to how we enforce the laws. We just make the laws. It's up to our department to enforce. I just wanted to clarify that.
All right, does anybody request a vote?
I do.
Okay, a vote having been requested, let's call the roll.
So a vote has been requested to accept 1A.
To accept recommendation number 1.
Judge
Is it
Lamaz,
that- I vote
Just
yes
without-
for the recommendation.
Without
sorry.
clarifying language, just as is?
Mr. Barnes, we can add clarifying language on the back end before it's written. So if anyone wants to help provide that to Mr. Ivy and that subcommittee, we can work on that. It would be helpful if we had consultants to help with this. We would probably be able to write all this stuff very thoroughly, but we're doing it ourselves. So.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so it's been a motion moved to accept 1A. Judge Lamaz, your vote?
I vote yes.
Delegate Washington?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Ms. Danso?
Yes.
Ms. Felix-Lawson?
Yes.
Delegate Fisher?
Yes.
Ms. Gutierrez?
I vote no.
Mr. Ivy?
Yes.
DCL Jackson?
Yes, with the clarifying language that we discussed.
Noted. Mr. Lottridge?
Yes.
Mr. Ruddy?
Yes.
Dr. Marsh?
Yes.
Ms. Morning?
Yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
No, not under the current language.
Ms. Oradaya?
Yes.
Mr. Preston?
Yes, with clarifying language.
Noted. Ms. Pruitt?
Yes.
Councilman Streeter?
Yes, with clarifying language.
Noted. Mr. Turner?
Yes, with clarifying language.
Noted. Judge Williams?
Yes. Thank you.
So we have 18 yes and 2 no's.
So recommendation 1 will be accepted. All right, recommendation number 2, remove racial biases from the gang unit registry and update policies and procedures. Does anyone have any objection to that recommendation? All right, hearing no objection, that recommendation is accepted and approved by consensus. The third recommendation is reform the Prince George's County Police Department no-knock warrant policies and procedures. Does anyone have any objection to that recommendation or any questions? All right. Hearing no objections, that will be accepted by consensus. Recommendation number 4, establish a cross-jurisdictional use of force training and coordination protocols for incidents. Any objections or questions to recommendation number 4?
Yes, I just have a question.
Yes.
I support it, and I think it is something that is needed. I just wanted to, I guess, get some understanding of how the subcommittee recommends to get this accomplished when you have over 20 jurisdictions that you would have to work with to get them to come into compliance and agree to submit to the Prince George's County Police Department's use of force model.
Mr. Ivy?
That's a great question. I think the understanding is that we cannot compel, say, municipal police departments to conform. The thinking was, though, and I believe this was from guidance from Major Alexander at the police department and others, what could be done is that we could put the procedures together at the PGPD level and encourage the municipalities to adopt them if appropriate. And also, this particular one is aimed also at similar types of coordinated efforts. We can't compel them to do it with municipalities, for example, but trying to work together on joint training, how to deal with emergency situations where municipal police departments might be involved in a way that the county is as well. We understand that they don't have the resources to do all of the types of training that we would like or that PGPD does, but the goal is to encourage them to do it, to facilitate it, and give them incentives to do it.
Thank you.
All right, well, let me ask it again. Anyone have any objection to recommendation number 5? I mean, number 4, I'm sorry, number 4. All right, hearing no objection, 4 will be approved by consensus. Recommendation number 5.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Judge. I just wanted to highlight something, and I didn't want us to go too far, and then I got lost. I just, for recommendation number 2, I just wanted to clarify language from when they write it up, if they can consider changing gang to criminal organization. That was changed on the Annapolis level, and I think gang can sometimes have racial viewpoint that only certain people are in a gang. I think criminal organization is more encompassing. So I just wanted to highlight as a note.
Good. Thank you, Delegate. Anyone have any objection to that?
I would say if we could say gang or criminal organization, or gang and, or or, because in the county and with our dealings with PGPD, everybody's spoke in terms explicitly of gangs. It's a gang unit within the department. I take your point, though. There are other criminal organizations where this might be relevant. I'm not sure there's a gang a registry that would apply to other organizations, but I don't think it would hurt to give it a more expansive rubric.
Yeah, Judge Lemassne, if you don't mind, I just want to clarify as well that that's what we've been receiving from the PGPD, that they use gang registry or gang unit registry, and even their usage of a gang registry with the federal government it says explicitly gang registry. So I agree in adding or criminal organization if that's more encompassing. I totally agree with that.
That's fine. Sorry.
Yep.
Anyone object to that? All right, it will be approved with that modification. All right, we did 3. Anyone have anything else on 3? We did 4. All right, we're up to recommendation number 5. Improve access and operations of all PGPD cameras, including body cameras, interrogation room cameras, and in-car cameras. Anyone have any questions or objections to number 5? All right, hearing no objections, number 5 is accepted by consensus. Recommendation number 6, implement and emphasize policies and training to prevent racially biased policing in PGPD. Anyone have any objections or questions about number 6? All right, hearing no objections, 6 is approved by consensus. Recommendation number 7, increase access to internal affairs documents with the Prince George's County State's Attorney's Office. Anyone have any questions or objections to that? Ms. Jackson?
Yes, can I get the chair to just, if he would, give some background on this recommendation?
Sure.
This is an effort to follow the lead of the Baltimore City approach, where the state's attorney's office They're I don't know what they call. I guess it's the solicitor's office in Baltimore City, and the police department have streamlined the ability to share these personnel documents through using an MOU that they put together. My understanding is that that's already in the works in the county. The state's attorney's office is working on that front as well. I think almost explicitly following the MOU that was implemented in Baltimore City. And so the idea here is to give support to that effort here.
Oops, thank you.
Thank you. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right, any objection to number 7? All right, Mr. Turner.
Thank you, Judge. I just wanted to, with regard to this recommendation, I just want to comment that my concern is that that if we were to adopt it, it would run afoul of current law. I believe state law as well as local law prohibits the police department from sharing this information from internal affairs files, personnel information. So I'm not sure we can modify this at all, or there could be some sort of clarification indicating that as long as this does not conflict with existing law, then I certainly wouldn't be opposed to it.
Well, I think the larger problem that we sort of ran across as we went through this is that existing law on the other side, from the standpoint of disclosure to the defense, isn't being followed. So the U.S. case, Brady v. Maryland, that was incorporated into the state discovery rules, isn't being followed. So currently, as it was discussed at the task force level, if I recall correctly, the police department doesn't have a mechanism in place for making sure that Brady material and personnel files is being looked for, much less found and provided to the state's attorney's office, so it can then be provided to the defense. So this is in part reaction to that, and I think frankly, I think the task force meeting partly got that moving a little faster than it was at the time. But, the clear statements at the time made it clear that the Prince George's County Police Department is not taking the steps it needs to take to meet its constitutional burdens and requirements under the Supreme Court law or the state discovery laws. And so this is one of the steps we thought we could use to move in that direction, especially since it's already moving forward in Baltimore City, which has the same state personnel rules that we're governed by here.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point, Mr. Turner, that the Sixth Amendment right to cross-examine takes precedence over anything else, Davis versus Alaska, Brady, and that this really is a constitutional violation.
No, I agree with both of you all with regard to the constitutional obligations and also discovery obligations under the Maryland rules. But I think where we probably disagree is that the police department at the county is not actually meeting its obligations. Now, does it work perfectly? Certainly not. Have there been mistakes made in the past? I'm sure there have been, but there have been efforts. There's been ongoing dialogue between the police department and the state's attorney's office to correct some of those mistakes. So again, I don't know if it's worth us going back and forth on this, but the law is what it is. And as far as Baltimore is concerned, Baltimore is an outlier. That's the only jurisdiction in the state that has where you have the city solicitor's office and the state attorney's office and the police department who reached an have reached an MOU. Every other county in the state of Maryland, and also with regard to federal prosecutors, there is a process that is in place. And I think the goal that we should be shooting for is to try to replicate that so that.
You're breaking up, Mr. Turner. Couldn't hear the last part of what you said. So do you object to number 7?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you now, Judge. So I do object, yes. I do object.
If I could just make one quick response, we really do not want the federal system in place. The federal rules for discovery are tremendously restrictive. In fact, they're so restrictive that, as you know, U.S. attorneys' offices around the country routinely take a more liberal approach, because under those rules, you wouldn't get discovery for witnesses who testified, for example, until after they've completed their direct testimony at trial. Everybody knows that's unworkable, so they're trying to informally create a process, and they have. But the steps that the state took in creating the discovery rule that incorporates Brady, and I was still state's attorney at the time, so that's over a decade ago. I think it's pretty clear that they've worked very well. I haven't heard anybody saying that open file discovery is a problem at the state level. And this just is an additional step. If it's because open file discovery only works if the documents get to the prosecutor's file. If they aren't, and we heard a lot of statements, not only from at the task force level, but I believe Mr. Lotritz and some of the others that mentioned this as well. And to be blunt, this has been my experience as a practitioner as well. You're not getting that stuff. If you maybe send a subpoena and you fight for it, you might have a shot, and then lo and behold, something might pop up. But it was clear in the testimony we heard that, at least at that point, the police department didn't have a process that was in place to go through and identify what these that these documents might be there on a case-by-case basis, which is the way it has to work. Otherwise, you're going to have misses. I know it's a big department, and there are a lot of officers, and some of them have files, but you've got to do something like this to make it work. Otherwise, there will be continued Brady violations that just don't rise to the level where people are aware of them. But the constitutional standards set by the Supreme Court, I think, have to be followed, and we need to start doing it.
All right, Mr. Turner, are you requesting a vote?
Sure, why not?
All right, let's vote on number 7.
Judge, are we voting on, we're at 7A, we're taking a vote on 7A?
We're taking a vote on 7 in its entirety, A and B.
Okay. Well, now a motion's been made to take a vote whether or not to accept number 7, increase access to internal affairs documents with the Prince George's County State's Attorney's Office. Judge Lamazny, how do you vote to accept number 7?
I vote yes.
Delegate Washington?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Ms. Danso?
Yes.
Ms. Felix-Lawson?
Yes.
Delegate Fisher?
Yes.
Ms. Gutierrez?
Yes.
Mr. Ivy?
Yes.
DCL Jackson?
I abstain, but want to say that we should comply with the law, whatever that is.
Abstain?
Yes, I abstain, but just don't agree with the comments that were made about the state of the law. So,
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Lotrich?
Oh, I think we can definitely say I'm an absolute yes.
Mr. Reddy?
Yes.
Dr. Marsh?
Yes.
Ms. Morning?
Definitely yes.
Mr. O'Neill?
Yes.
Ms. Ordaya?
Yes, and thank you for another awesome recommendation.
Mr. Preston,
Yes.
Ms. Pruitt,
Yes.
Councilman Streeter,
Yes.
Mr. Turner,
No, but only as to A.
okay. Are we voting all of 7, Judge Lamazny?
Yes, we're voting all of 7. So since he hasn't voted for all of it, he's a no.
Okay. Recorded as no for Mr. Turner. Judge Williams,
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I mean, we can't just give you a half of a no, Mr. Turner.
No, that's fine. I'm sorry. I'm just going in and out.
Yeah, okay, I thought.
Tonight, so I apologize. That's fine.
so the A's have it at 18 to keep 7, all of 7, number 7.
Thank you. Recommendation number 8, Prince George's County Police Department shall establish a robust customer service campaign. Does anyone object to this recommendation? Recommendation 8 is approved by consensus, hearing no objection. Recommendation 9, stop all references of a paramilitary organization. This says within PGPD, but I think it's stop referring to the Prince George's County Police Department as a paramilitary organization and utilize more inclusive language to address county residents and visitors. Does anyone object to recommendation 9? All right, hearing no object. I'm sorry.
Judge, I do. Because it's just not clear to me what that language means. I'm really not clear.
I think it just means stop using the word paramilitary. If you're in the police department, if you're referring to the police department, you're in the county government. It is a paramilitary structure, and you and I are in law enforcement or have been, so we know what that means. The public gets very different connotations from that are overwhelmingly negative and unnecessarily so. We don't need to refer to the police department as a paramilitary organization. We can still explain what it is and what it does, and I think that works for the county residents if we do it that way.
I'm not going to debate that, but I just think that the structure has been in place. Not saying it's right. The structure has been in place, and we don't have another structure to replace it right now. So what do you replace it with? And I know it's not to be debated, but I'm just throwing it out there.
No, we're not talking about replacing the structure because it's a hierarchical structure. I mean, so is Microsoft, frankly, but just out of habit, that's how we talk about police departments generally. But we don't need to. We're just saying don't use that word.
Okay.
All right, anyone object to number 9? All right, hearing no objection, 9 is accepted by consensus. Recommendation number 10, the Prince George's County Council shall establish a countywide use of force statute. Does anyone have any objection to recommendation number 10?
This is Yamilet. I don't have an objection, but having reviewed the use of force statute, it actually encompasses all of the items outlined in this recommendation. So just a heads up that it will be checked off because it's already encompassed in our current use of force general order.
All right, this is to have the county council establish a countywide use of force.
This would make it statutory as opposed to general orders.
So it's consistent with the current general orders, is what you're saying.
Correct.
Right, thank you. Anyone object to recommendation number 10? All right, hearing no objection, 10 is accepted by consensus. Recommendation 11, require extensive training for the use of flashbangs. Anyone object to that recommendation?
I don't have an objection, Judge Lamassney, but I think that just wonderful point of record in Prince George's County, the only personnel that are trained and are allowed to use those are members of Special Operations Division. And that is not the case necessarily with other municipal agencies throughout Prince George's County. But I just wanted for the record to for the group to understand that.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I mean, we've got the list of items here. This doesn't have all of them there, but this is in part aimed at the scenario that we had in Hyattsville and that Dr. Powers talked about. So it's really linked to issues when we're dealing with mental health scenarios, where whether it's flashbangs or other, shouting commands or the like, might exacerbate the problem instead of helping to facilitate a peaceful resolution. And it also dovetails with the ideas about trying to get mental health professionals on the scene in some of these crisis situations where they can help. We're not requiring officers to be psychiatrists at the same time that they're also trying to do their job as law enforcement officers. So that's the overall thrust.
All right, any objection to number 11? All right, hearing no objection, 11 will be accepted by consensus.
I think you got a hand there from
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Streeter.
Actually, Judge, it was for the next one.
Number 12?
Yes.
All right, number 12 is, so 11 is accepted by consensus. It's approved by consensus. Number 12, Prince George's County shall consider the feasibility of transfer of traffic enforcement. It goes on to say, Prince George's County shall seek state legislation to enable moving additional traffic enforcement authority from the PGPD to the Prince George's County Revenue Authority. And the county shall study the feasibility of implementation. Yes, Councilman.
Yeah, I'm just a point of clarification. I don't know what additional traffic enforcement means.
Well, what this gets at is a desire to move some traffic enforcement functions from the police department to a non-police agency. And the reasoning behind that is another way of trying to get at the pretextual traffic stops. So the question that raised was, as we heard a few minutes ago, well, if we're going to let some of that go, how do we enforce it otherwise? Well, one of the options would be, well, we've already got revenue authority that deals with some aspects of this, like red light cameras and the like, and they do have some personnel in place for parking tickets and those sorts of things. But we were told that we can't just shift it over necessarily. You need some state legislative activities to support that. And obviously there would have to be some sort of transition if whatever these functions are that get moved from the police department to the revenue authority, they'll have to figure that out, as well as where the line gets drawn, what stays with the police department, what gets moved to the revenue authority. So for example, reckless driving, drunk driving and the like, that's not going to the revenue authority, that would stay with the police department. But some of the other issues we talked about probably could be moved over to a revenue authority, and they could handle it in the same way they're handling some of these other functions.
Yeah, thank you. I just didn't understand the additional as going to the revenue authority as opposed. So that was the point of clarification I needed.
It surprised me a little too. I didn't think I didn't think that was going to be the place, but after we heard more about it, it made some sense.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone have any objection to recommendation number 12?
Judge Lamassney, I don't have an objection per se, but I think that as it's written, as we did earlier with some clarifying language, which would stipulate some examples of what some of those traffic enforcement efforts that would be recommended to be moved to the revenue authority would be. And I think if we have a clear understanding of what those duties and assignments for the police department versus the revenue authority would be, I think would provide better clarity.
I think that's a fair point, but I think in part, step one will be, state legislative activity, because I was told that, some of the things we might want to move over there, we can't move yet because it's under state law. And also there's an issue about whether the revenue stream would follow with it. So is the enforcement agency going to get the money, or would it go? I'm told in some instances, if the revenue authority did it, the money would go to the state level as opposed to the county level. So I think there are a number of things that would need to be sifted through, especially with respect to state legislation. And I don't think we heard from the revenue authority at a formal level either. Informally, yes, formally, no. So I think
I was going to say, and the recommendation does include a feasibility study, which would delineate that.
Yeah, the idea was to try and see if we could put that plan together along the lines of what you're suggesting.
I support that with a feasibility study.
Okay. Anyone object to number 12? Anyone have any objection? All right, 12 is approved by consensus, hearing no objection. And the last recommendation from Mr. Ivy's hardworking subcommittee is number 13. PGPD shall update its use of force policy in the general orders. And the general orders shall include the following language. Officers in carrying out their duties shall apply nonviolent means when possible before resorting to the use of physical force. An officer may use physical force only if nonviolent means would be ineffective in effecting an arrest, preventing an escape, or preventing an imminent threat of serious bodily injury or death to the officer or another person. Anyone have any objection to number 13? All right, hearing no objection, 13 is approved by consensus. And that concludes Mr. Ivy's recommendations. It was a very hardworking subcommittee.
And I'd like to thank the members of the subcommittee and for their hard work, as well as the co-chairs who were there for all of the meetings too.
We'll
It was a pleasure.
Yeah, we'll get to the thank you in a second. So thanks for that. We'll get there. Thank you, Judge Lamasley, and thank you, Mr. Ivy. So we're going to move on to the financial management portion of the recommendations subcommittee, which was chaired by Ms. Judy Danso. Our first recommendation we have on your list is dedicate PGPD revenue to health and human services needs. Are there any objections or questions to this recommendation? Seeing no objections or questions to this recommendation, it has been accepted with consent. We're going to move on to the second recommendation. Okay, recommendation number 2 is to invest and increase the capacity of the Citizens Complaint Oversight Panel. This states that increase the budget of the Citizens Complaint Oversight Panel to create additional staffing, resources, and ability to review and investigate more cases. Any questions or objections to this recommendation? Seeing no questions or objections to this recommendation, it has been accepted with consent of the committee. The recommendation number 3, eliminate all PGPD military equipment. Any objections to this recommendation?
Delegate Washington, I just have a question. As it relates specifically to Prince George's County Police Department, I think I support that in some cases, some military equipment to support the SWAT teams. In general use, I agree that it should not be appropriate and with specialized training for those specific situations in support of critical incidents by duly trained personnel only.
Okay. Any other comments or questions?
Well, I guess Oh, I'm sorry.
Ms. Jackson, go ahead.
I guess in follow-up to that, I need to ask, is that what the committee intended? Or did you intend by this recommendation to eliminate military equipment even from the SWAT teams, even for the use of the SWAT teams?
Ms. Danso, do you want to answer that or do you want me to answer?
Yes, I can. Thank you so much. So this was actually a co-chair recommendation. It was discussed with a co-chair recommendation. I'm sorry. It was discussed amongst the members of our subcommittee. And what we intended by putting forth this specific recommendation was that the department would refrain from acquiring and purchasing any additional military equipment. It's my understanding that during one of the presentations where the chief came before the work group, that he confirmed that the department did not actually have military equipment. And so that was the specific goal of putting forth this recommendation. And I know both Chair Lemassney and Delegate Washington certainly brought this to us for consideration, but that was the underlying intent when we discussed and ultimately agreed on it as a subcommittee recommendation.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Delegate, that's correct. We were told there was no military equipment. In fact, we were invited to go out and look and see for ourselves.
Ms. Pruitt?
So I have an additional question about that. Was this perhaps in reference to the 1033 program with the federal government, whereby they give away surplus military equipment to police departments across the country?
Correct.
Okay, so I remember that presentation, but so when the police department says that there is no military equipment, were they inferring that they don't accept anything from the 1033 program? Does anybody know that, or?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Are there any objections to this recommendation? Does anyone require a vote on this recommendation? Seeing no objections to this recommendation, we will add clarifying language, and we will. This vote will be accepted as a consensus amongst the committee. Recommendation number 4: Prince George's County Police Department shall pursue and acquire the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies certification, also known as CALIA certification. Any questions? Sorry, I just saw a little child in the background of somebody's video. Any objections to this recommendation? Seeing no objections to this recommendation, it has been accepted as a consensus recommendation. We'll move to recommendation number 5. PGPD shall reduce overtime pay and policies. Any objections to this recommendation? It states PGPD shall establish an MOU that reflects an interagency agreement by and between the department, the district court for Prince George's County, and the state's attorney's office to significantly reduce court time and overtime. Any objections? Seeing no objections of this recommendation, has been accepted with as a consensus recommendation. Recommendation number 6 should read prioritize filling current/vacant civilian roles with civilians and reassign sworn officers from civilian positions. It goes on to say PGPD should strive to ensure that at least, it should say 30% of all civilian positions are filled by qualified civilian employees by the end of each fiscal year. Are there any objections to this recommendation? Hearing no questions or objections, this recommendation has been accepted with as a consensus recommendation. Number 7, conduct an annual financial audit of all payouts, lawsuits, settlements, and fines related to the Prince George's County Police Department. It goes on to say that the County Council's Audits and Investigations Division or independent auditor shall perform an annual audit for all payouts, lawsuits, settlements, fines, and accidents, police misconduct, etc., as a result of officer action or inaction attributable to their functions and duties as Prince George's County Police Department officer employees. Any questions or objections to this recommendation? Hearing no objections, that recommendation has been accepted with consensus. Recommendation number 8, reimagine the Prince George's County Police Department budget to effectively deliver progressive public safety reforms. PGPD, it goes on to say, PGPD shall take proactive and diligent steps to have completed an internal forensic financial review of its costs of policing in Prince George's County. This review should be based on data and outcomes supported by the current budget and current police operations. It shall be comprehensive enough to reimagine the complete police department budget to fit and ultimately implement all recommendations provided to the county executive for the police reform in Prince George's County as a whole. Any objections to this recommendation? Hearing no objection. Mr. O'Neill, do you mind muting yourself, please? All right, it's gotta be someone else. I'm getting back on. Mr. Street, I think that might be you. There we go. Okay, recommendation number 9. Improve transparency in the collective bargaining agreements. Any objections, excuse me, to this recommendation? Hearing no objections to this recommendation, it has been accepted as a consensus recommendation. Recommendation number 10, increase funding for the diversion expansion program through PGPD and the State's Attorney's Office joint collaboration. Any questions or objections to this recommendation? Hearing none, that recommendation has been accepted as a consensus recommendation. Number 11, explore third-party liability coverage opportunities for Prince George's County Police Department. Any questions or objections to this recommendation? Hearing no objections or questions on this recommendation, that recommendation has been accepted. Recommendation number 12, the Prince George's County Police Department shall explore and adopt new automated operation systems. Any questions or objections on that recommendation? Seeing no questions or objections on that recommendation has been accepted. Recommendation number 13, and our final recommendation of the day. Prince George's County Police Department shall review current allocation of fundings for specialty units. Goes on to say PGPD shall coordinate and work with the University of Maryland Safe Center and other providers throughout the county to address the issue of human trafficking and the current allocation of funding for this specialty unit to determine operational effectiveness. Any objections or questions of this recommendation? Seeing none, that recommendation has been accepted as a consensus recommendation. That concludes our voting session, everyone. Can everybody hear me? That concludes our voting session, and that concludes our work so far. It seems like we do have some clarifying language, and I want to just give you all a round of applause for all your hard work over these last 5 months. So congratulations. I know I'm only clapping by myself. It was a long road to get here, but we made all our recommendations today. They will be sent to the county executive after we put these into a nice package and provide some clarifying language and some clear directions to where we want where the intent is of the actual recommendation. So I just want to say, Judge, do you have any comments, anything you want to say? And I'm sorry, let me just, before you go, Judge, I know you just shook your head saying no, but let me give Delegate Fisher, Mr. Ivy, and Judy Danso to say a couple words about their subcommittees and the work that they've done.
I guess I'll go first. Okay, thank you so much to my subcommittee, Keith Lottridge and Orlando Barnes. I really had just such a great time with them. I learned so much. They let the young kid on the block take the reins and help me navigate a very complicated issue. And I just really appreciate it. And I'm gonna miss Wednesdays at 5:30. It was so fun. And yeah, when COVID's over, I owe the two of them a meal, and I will do that. So thank you again.
Mr. Ivy?
I certainly want to thank my subcommittee members, Judge Williams, Ms. Gutierrez, Mr. Ruddy, Lieutenant Harvin, Dana Ashton, India Roebuck. Everybody did a great job. I want to thank the police department too. Major Alexander in particular, I thought was extremely helpful. Mr. Turner at the front end of this too, I thought gave us a lot of insight for the full task force, but and to the co-chairs. I thought you all have done not only an excellent job at our subcommittee, but for guiding this whole process. I appreciate your work.
Oh, and I forgot to thank the county executive staff. I wanted to thank Ms. Ria, who had to deal with me and meet with me, and Ryan Middleton and everyone, and Major McCreary, who I kept calling Colonel. So I forgot to thank them too. So thank you.
Extra. Ms. Danso?
Yes, thank you, Delegate. So I also take away a not only meaningful experience and opportunity, as my good friend, Ms. Felix-Lawson said yesterday, but also just the valuable connections and relationships that have been cultivated amongst this entire work group, and certainly within our subcommittee as well over the last few months. I was really blessed to have a subcommittee that was diverse in thought, experience, and perspective, quite frankly. I had Councilman Streeter, who obviously has some working knowledge of the budget process. Mr. O'Neill, retired law enforcement, was just a wealth of institutional knowledge. Thank you so much. Ms. Oriata, who is a well-known advocate in the community, and certainly was vocal about certain recommendations that she certainly wanted us to put forth. So I'm truly grateful to the subcommittee voting members. Anya was also a part of our subcommittee. She was a part of our subcommittee from audits and investigations. But we really could not have done this without our support staff. Battalion Chief Bender, thank you so much. You were just so instrumental, along with Ms. Watson, Valerie Watson, and Matthew Hatchett was our intern. So we're really grateful. We really got it done, and we tried to make the dollars make sense. Ultimately, within our subcommittee, it was a heavy lift. But I'm just truly grateful to everyone that served. I'm certainly grateful to Delegate Washington and Judge Lamazny for your guidance and really being participatory during our subcommittee meetings. And I share in the sentiment with Mr. Ivy in terms of thanking the department and Chief Velez for also allowing us to, ask several questions about data and information that was ultimately provided. Also to Ms. Fair, our SME from the department, the fiscal manager. She was a godsend because I was able to certainly tap into her thoughts and gain some additional information from her as well. And so we're just ultimately grateful, and we're looking forward to moving forward. Thank you.
No, thank you, Judge Lamazny.
It was an absolutely wonderful experience for me. I met people I had heard about but had never met before. I was so impressed with everybody's dedication and everybody's willingness to stay and work and talk. It was just an absolutely wonderful experience. So I thank you all for that.
Yeah, I also just want to thank, the interns that came in, and they came in. I mean, these are college students, guys, that we found through professors that I knew at the universities, at University of Maryland or at Bowie State, that interned with us. And so I'm grateful for them. Also want to thank Ms. Brewer, who called us and offered the position to us. And I was like, are you sure? Do you know who you're talking to right now? But I just want to thank her for her steadfastness and everything she's done. Also want to thank Ryan, my frat brother and friend, who's done a great job with us as well and helping us guide us through this long journey. And I can't leave without saying thank you to Lieutenant Harvin, who has been texting me almost every single day, that we get it all straight and that we're all taken care of and that we get the answers that we want. Some answers we did get, others we did not, but it is quite all right. We will get them because we have made the recommendations to make sure that we get the answers that we actually need. So with that said, I want to thank you all as well, everybody on this group, for being just so great to work with, to see you all, to answering my texts, answering my emails, and Mr. Preston, thanks for those late night calls to you, sir, to get your advice on some of these pieces. And I know that we all don't agree on everything, but I think we came to a great consensus on some great recommendations today that I think we all should be and feel proud of. This isn't the last meeting that we'll have, as I said in the beginning. We do have another meeting on December 2nd to accept the full recommendations as written to provide them to the county executive by December 4th, on December 4th of this year. So with that said, thank you all, and I'll see you soon. If there's any, and for the folks, and just to make some things clear, if you do have that clarifying language that we need and you can get it to us, Ms. Jackson, please send it over to us. We would greatly appreciate it so we can add it in and make sure that things are clear for that, so that our county executive can implement our recommendations with fidelity as she chooses them. So with that said, thank you all. And also, I'm sorry, I gotta say thank you to my legislative aide, Sam Jackson, who you all have not met, but he's been behind the scenes doing a great job of making sure that we're all on track too. So with that said, everybody at home, those are our recommendations. You'll get the full ones that will be made public on December 4th as we transition them to the county executive. And as we said before, the coronavirus rates are going up, and so we ask you to wear masks and stay safe. And happy Thanksgiving to everybody.
Happy Thanksgiving to you.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you all.
Ryan, can we go off live and not cut off?